In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Marianne's guests are leaders in their field, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in their own work. They teach others to develop, refocus, and grow. Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. And remember, make every moment count.
Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so excited to be introducing our first guest, Dr. Walter-semkiw, and he's here today to talk to us about principles of reincarnation, understanding past lives. So welcome to the show, Dr. Walter.
Thank you very much.
What a joy it is to have you here. You are basically the head person in regards to some of this research, and I was just fascinated with the work that you've done. And I have to ask you, what prompted you to become interested in the topics of reincarnation? Because I know that you're a medical doctor.
That's right. My entire background is in science. But what happened when I was in my residency training in Chicago, a friend of mine suggested that I go see a medium who was working out of a local metaphysical bookstore. And at the time, I didn't believe in psychics or mediums, but it was winter in Chicago and there wasn't much to do. So I went thinking that if nothing else, it would be entertaining. And the person I saw was a trance medium. And the way that they work is they go into a meditative state and allow a spirit being to basically take over their body and vocal cords, and the medium allows the spirit to talk to you in this way. Of interest, later on, I started to work with Kevin Ryerson, who's also a trance medium, and this medium who I worked with back in 1984 worked in the very same manner. And perhaps later we can talk a little bit about my work with Kevin Ryerson. But basically, in this session, the medium brought up topics that were very personal, issues that I had with my father. And I thought, how could they possibly know that? They also knew that I was in training to be a doctor, even though I didn't tell them anything about myself. And what was even more specific is they said that I would become a doctor in corporate medicine, which indeed 2 years later, that's exactly what happened. So there seemed to be substance to what was going on. And also in this session, they told me about two past lifetimes, one during the American Revolution, and they told me who I was, and if I researched this person, I would see myself in physical appearance and personality traits and so forth. And at the time, I didn't really believe any of it. But about 12 years later, I was a corporate medical director for an oil company, Unocal 76, and it was in the middle of the day, lunchtime, and I was going to meet some managers to go have a meeting over the lunch hour. And they said, let's meet in the parking lot. And as I was standing there, this booming voice that sounded like a megaphone in my head told me to study that lifetime that the medium had told me about 12 years earlier. Well, that prompted me to finally do that. And that's the subject of my first book, Return of the Revolutionaries, which was published in 2003. But actually, in my case, I don't consider it to be the most important. What happened was all this made me become a scholar on reincarnation research. And really, my primary focus is trying to make the research of Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia available to people. Dr. Stevenson, for a period of 40 years, first of all, he was very respectable. He was the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. He was the chairman of the department, but he got a grant to study these cases that he heard about of small children who spontaneously remembered past lives that could be factually verified. And so that's what he did. For a period of 40 years, he went all over the world studying these young children. And in the typical Stevenson case, as soon as they can speak, they tell their parents, my name is not the name that you're calling me, and you're not my real parents. My real parents are going to come and get me soon, and this isn't my real home. And eventually the child gives enough information about the past life family in terms of name, where they lived, locations, and so forth, that the biologic parents can locate the past life family. And when the past life family is located, the child can identify past life family members by name, know things that nobody outside of the family knows about, and in the end, the past life family accepts the child as the reincarnation of their deceased loved one. And Dr. Stevenson studied about 2,500 children of this sort, and in about half the cases, so let's say 1,200 cases, the past lives could be factually validated.
Wow. I mean, the spirit's such an amazing thing, especially when we get into reincarnation. And so of all the cases that you've been a part of and just been involved in or have come across your desk, what is one that has really stood out to you?
Well, there are two of Ian Stevenson's cases which I think are very extraordinary, and they're the cases of Suzanne Ghanem and Daniel Jurdy. And what's amazing about these cases is that they were studied over a period of about 20 to 30 years. So Dr. Stevenson, for instance, studied in the Suzanne Ghanem case, the past life personality was Hanan Mansour, and he studied Hanan back in the late 60s, and then revisited Suzanne Ghanem, who had the memories of being Hanan, about 20 years later. And it turned out that as a full-grown adult, Suzanne Ghanem has the exact same facial features as Hanan Mansour, the past life personality. And it's a typical Ian Stevenson case where Suzanne had full memories of her prior lifetime, was able to give enough information to find her past life family, and was able to identify all the family members by name. And the past life husband, whose name was Farouk, who was a police officer, he was very skeptical in the beginning, but came to believe that this little girl, Suzanne, is the reincarnation of his wife, Hanan, his deceased wife, Hanan, because he could show Suzanne pictures of them at social events, and Suzanne could identify all these friends and family members in the photos who she had never met before. And this is, again, when Suzanne is just a child, 4 or 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And the Daniel Jurdy case is very similar. Both of these cases come from Lebanon. Dr. Stevenson first studied Daniel Jurdy in the late 1970s. It's a classic case where Daniel remembered his name from the past lifetime, which was Rashid Kadej. He remembered where he lived, was able to be reunited with the past life family, and identify the family members and friends by name. And in both of these cases, which were again studied over a period of 20 to 30 years, Dr. Stevenson first studied the case when these people were young children. But he went back to Lebanon in 1998 and revisited the cases, and now Suzanne and Daniel are full-grown adults, and they have the exact same facial features as they did in the prior lifetimes. So, and this is something that we're seeing in other cases too, where facial features are consistent from lifetime to lifetime. So when you put together the spontaneous memories in childhood, the validation of the memories by the past life family, and then finding that these people look the same as they did in their prior incarnations, it's pretty much proof of reincarnation. It's hard to argue anything else.
Without a doubt, especially when you have these children making these, sharing this information, and, I'm sure parents are going, well, where are they getting this all from? And they're still remembering all this. Yeah. So I know that one of the things you talk about also is soul energy template or hologram. Can you explain for our listeners what that is?
Yes. If it's observed that people look the same from lifetime to lifetime, you have to wonder, well, how does this work? And my theory is that the soul projects a hologram or an energy template into the developing fetus, much like orthopedic surgeons use electricity to guide the growth of bone in bad fractures. And this energy template is what the developing tissues form around, so that appearance is similar from lifetime to lifetime. And I should mention also that many times talent is retained from lifetime to lifetime, which explains childhood prodigies. And so I think it's through this energy template that not only physical appearance remains the same, but information and skills and talents can be downloaded. And, since there's such a visual component to this research, I just wanted to point out that I have a website where people can see pictures of all these cases. And it's one of those things where one picture is worth 1,000 words. Mm-hmm. And the website is www.iisis.net. It's like the bad ISIS, but with an extra I in front. And if you go to a link right on the home page that says Principles of Reincarnation, you basically will get a concise, state-of-the-art review of reincarnation research. And one of the reasons I'm doing the website and doing this work is that Ian Stevenson's writing style was very technical. He was actually writing for the scientific community, and he was very concerned about the scientific community accepting his research. So he wrote for academics. And as such, when you read his books, it's very difficult to follow sometimes. It's difficult for me. And so what I've been doing is writing synopses of Stevenson's cases in easy-to-read formats. And I'm illustrating the cases with pictures and diagrams and so forth, so that it's kind of fun to read. Since we're on the topic of facial features and talents, another very important case is the reincarnation case of Anne Frank. And most people know that Anne Frank died in a concentration camp in 1945. Well, in 1954, a woman was born in Sweden by the name of Barbara Carlin, and she was born into a Christian family. And the family had no belief in reincarnation at all. Well, when Barbara was a young child, 2 or 3 years of age, she basically behaved just like a child does in the classic Ian Stevenson case. She told her parents, "My name's not Barbara, it's Anna Frank, and you're not my real parents. My real parents are going to come get me and take me to my real home." And her parents were shocked to hear this, and they were so concerned they even sent her to a psychiatrist to see if there was something wrong with her. But Barbara, and in the beginning they thought she was making all this up, because they had never heard of anybody named Anna Frank or Anne Frank. And the reason is because, again, Barbara was born in 1954. By the time she was talking about this. It was maybe 1957, 58. And the diary of Anne Frank had not yet been translated and distributed in Sweden. So her parents had never heard of Anne Frank. But Barbara had full memory. She remembered hiding in the attic. She remembered the arrest. She had phobias from that lifetime. For instance, she was afraid of men in uniforms. She wouldn't eat any beans because the Frank family lived on beans for 2 years. But her parents thought she was making this all up. Things changed when she was 10 years old. By that time, the parents had heard of who the historic Anne Frank was, and they went on a tour of European cities, including Amsterdam, which is where the Frank family had hid from the Nazis for 2 years. And by now, the house had been turned into a museum, and Barbara's father wanted to go to the Anne Frank Museum, and he took the phone off the hook to get a taxi to take him there. And Barbara said, "We don't need a car. It's right near here." And the parents said, "Well, how could you know? You've never been here before." And little Barbara at 10 years of age says, "Well, I'll show you." And she led them by the hand on a 10-minute walk through the very winding, confusing streets of Amsterdam, all the way straight to the Anne Frank house. And her parents, again, were kind of stunned. How could you possibly know where this location is? And then they went inside the Frank house, and they went into the room where Anne Frank had slept and lived during their 2 years of hiding. And Barbara looked at one of the walls and said, "Look, Mommy, the pictures of the movie stars are still on the wall." And the mother looked at the wall and saw that it was bare. And she reflected this to Barbara, "Barbara, there's nothing on the wall." And Barbara looked again and saw that this was true, became confused, and started to cry. And the mother said, "Well, let's ask the tour guide." And the tour guide said, "Well, yes, indeed, the pictures that Anne Frank had clipped and posted of movie stars normally are on that wall, but people were touching them and taking them, damaging them, and so we took them down, but we're going to put them back up, but under glass so that they're protected." And this is the first time that her parents realized that everything she was saying about Anne Frank, her past life as Anne Frank, was not fantasy, but it was true. Between the combination of finding the Anne Frank house without direction, which I termed geographic memory, and then knowing where the pictures were supposed to be, even though they had been taken down for mounting. Barbara wrote a book about her story, and amazingly enough, she was reconnected with Anne Frank's last living relative, Judy Elias, who was Anne Frank's cousin. And Judy at this time is a very elderly man, while Barbara, she wrote her book in middle age, about 45 years of age. Mm-hmm. And Judy wanted to meet this person who claimed to be the reincarnation of Anne Frank. And when they met, they had an immediate emotional reaction and hugged and cried together and talked for 2 hours straight. And when Barbara's book came out, he even participated with her in a presentation and even read from her book. And so this is another case where a family was reunited, or family members were reunited and had recognition. And it's quite remarkable that Judy Elias, who was the president of the Anne Frank Foundation, came to support her case. When I first heard about Barbara's case in the year 2000, and at first I was very skeptical, but when I met her, I could tell that she was genuine. And she's a very grounded person. One thing I forgot to mention is that Barbara was a childhood writing prodigy, just like Anne Frank. I make the point that Anne Frank is not the most famous victim of the Holocaust because she had the worst death. It's because she was a child prodigy writer who wrote about universal themes such as good and evil, and her diary became an international bestseller. Well, Barbara was born with the same talent. She just started to write for herself. A family member noticed some of her writings and said, "This is really good. It should be published." And within a short period of time, Barbara's first book, Man on Earth, was published when she was only 12 years old. And she had 9 books published total in her teenage years. And to cap this all off, she has the very same facial features as Anne Frank. And that's where I was saying that I had first encountered this case in the year 2000. And I had already been seeing these cases where people look the same. Well, Barbara in her book never says that she looks like Anne Frank, because the basis of her story is her memories in childhood. Well, when I met her, I compared the images. You need to really put images side by side in similar poses to really appreciate the facial similarities. But Barbara has the exact same facial features as Anne Frank. And again, listeners can view this on iisis.net. And also Barbara and the images of her are featured on a viral video that I put up entitled Evidence of Reincarnation. If you just Google Evidence of Reincarnation, it'll pop up. It's had 5.4 million views or so. And in that short 9-minute video, the work of Ian Stevenson is discussed, and Barbara Carlin's case is also discussed.
Wow. Well, and for our listeners, IISIS stands for Institute for the Integration of Science, Intuition, and Spirit. So it's iisis.net. You want to go ahead and go over there and again check it out, the page that is listed, Principles of Reincarnation, where you can see all these photographs that are just astounding that we're talking about here. And there's so many, there's so many cases here. It's just like, my goodness. I had a couple questions here. So, I know.
Let me just finish the Anne Frank case with one point.
Please do. Yeah.
And this is really the point of why I do this work, why I created the website. The cases, the Anne Frank case, as well as Ian Stevenson cases, show that we can change religion, nationality, and ethnic affiliation from lifetime to lifetime. Keep in mind that Anne Frank was persecuted as a Jew in Nazi Germany, but Barbara was born in Sweden to a Christian family. I point out that if the Nazis knew that you could be born Jewish in one lifetime and Christian in another, the Holocaust could never have happened. Ian Stevenson has cases in which a Muslim person can reincarnate as a Hindu or a Christian and vice versa. If people realize that we can change religion, nationality, ethnic affiliation, people would stop fighting about it. And in an ironic twist, our website is pronounced ISIS, and now it's associated with a terrorist group. But really what we're trying to do is do actually the opposite of ISIS, whereas the bad ISIS is killing people based on religion. The whole point of our organization is that religion changes from lifetime to lifetime. So it's really crazy to persecute people based on religion. And what it comes down to really is your sense of identity of who you are. So most people assume the religion that they're brought up with as children, and that becomes part of one's identity. I am a Jewish person. I am a Christian person or a Muslim. And as we see in the Mideast, people take these markers of identity very, very seriously to the point where they're killing each other over it. My point is we change religions from lifetime to lifetime. So we have to develop a different kind of identity where we're more of a universal human, and our identity is not really based on the religion or nationality that we're born into.
Well, and so that brings me to my next question, and we've got a few minutes here, so I think we can briefly touch on this. But so when someone reincarnates as let's say a woman in past lifetimes and then reincarnates as a man, how does that impact the person today, and what are some of the similar characteristics that you've observed that those souls bring?
Yeah, so this is another very important point, which shows how reincarnation research can really shed light on psychology. In Ian Stevenson's 1,200 cases of validated childhood memory cases, gender only changes in 10% of the cases. So in 90% of the cases, we come back as the same gender, the same sex. That infers that our souls, one's particular soul has a preferred gender to incarnate in. And what is observed in some of the Stevenson cases is that when somebody incarnates in a gender they're not used to, homosexuality or gender identity issues can result. The case that is most dramatic involved a male Japanese soldier during World War II who was stationed in Burma. The Japanese army had occupied Burma as one of their conquests, and a Japanese soldier who was a cook befriended a Burmese woman who also had interests in the culinary arts, and they became friends. And eventually this Japanese cook was killed in an Allied strafing run. Planes, shot down at people, and this cook was killed. Well, this cook then reincarnated as a daughter of the very Burmese woman he befriended. And that's another important point in reincarnation research, is that we plan lifetimes to be with people that we have affection for and have known before. And there's Ian Stevenson twin study, which is very important, which hopefully we'll have time to discuss, but if you don't, please check it out on the website. Well, in this case of the Japanese cook, he reincarnated as a woman to the Burmese friend of his, but retained the mindset of a man, and had full memories of his prior lifetime in Japan, would talk about missing Japan, missing his children in Japan, missing Japanese food. And this was very abnormal for a Burmese person, because the Burmese hated the Japanese, because the Japanese leveled many atrocities on the Burmese population. So this Japanese male soldier reincarnated as a woman, still identified as a man, and eventually became a lesbian, because this person, this girl, still was attracted to women, just like the male Japanese soldier was.
And it's really interesting how the soul plays a part in all aspects of that, and with reincarnation, how things like our sexuality, our facial features, and just our mannerisms are so tied into all of that.
Right.
Well, Dr. Walter, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us today. We greatly appreciate you being here and sharing all of your wisdom with us. My goodness, we could talk about this topic for hours.
And I do.
We'll have to have you back on. Okay.
All right, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, thank you. We're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special. When you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Ben Wexler is a gifted leadership development and strategy consultant for professionals who want to transform their organizations and careers. Through a uniquely personalized set of processes, participants discover their unique knowledge, how to leverage that knowledge and experience, and then put it all together with a global strategy. You're more valuable, your organization is more valuable, and the change is viral. Contact Ben at 630-881-1074, 630-881-1074.
Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so excited we're spending this time today. We've got quite a show lined up. Our next guest is Robert-Kopecky, and he's here today to talk to us about his life and also his book, How to Survive Life and Death. So welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you, Marianne. It's great to be here.
What a joy it is to have you here.
It's great to be anywhere when you're talking about near-death experiences, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, especially when you've had one, I'm sure the sky looks more blue, the plants are looking a little greener, everything's a little bit more pronounced, I would guess.
Yeah, and I've unfortunately or fortunately, I'm either lucky or unlucky to have had 3 of them. So
yeah, so I know that you've had 3. Can you share those experiences with us so our listeners can learn a little bit more about you?
Sure, yeah. The interesting thing about them to me in particular is that they're all not only just that I'm here, to talk about them. I obviously didn't die; they were near-death experiences, but they were all different. They kind of stuck with motifs that you may have heard that are familiar. They occurred within about a 15-year period, kind of roughly spaced out. The first one was a single car accident where I had an equipment malfunction, and this will tell you about the time period because it was my cassette player.
Oh, boy.
my cassette tape was eaten by my cassette player, and while I was fussing with it, I glanced off an oddly parked car and into a telephone pole, and the next moment, I found myself at the top of the telephone pole. It was a kind of twilight, so the street lamp had gone on, and there was a moth flying. I looked over, there was a moth flying around the street lamp next to me. And I looked down and witnessed the car that I had been driving kind of collapsed into this telephone pole with the windshield busted out and somebody kind of hanging out of it that I began to realize was me. Mm-hmm. And I could see over the hedges and foliage and stuff into people's backyards and stuff from up there, and saw people running out of their houses and hollering to call an ambulance and that kind of thing, and saw the ambulance pull up and put me in the back. And I tried to talk to people, but nobody could hear me, and I was not really alone or didn't feel alone, although I didn't turn around and meet whoever was behind me, but I had this kind of presence with me that shepherded me off into what I can only describe as a kind of a warm gray cloud. And eventually I was in a very pastoral place having a sort of an interview with a personage that I don't really remember distinctly. The thing that I try to do in my recollections of these experiences is not to elaborate too much beyond what I exactly remember them to have been. I try to kind of keep them in place so that they don't expand into anything more. Already the lessons that I got from each one, I think, are pretty darn significant. And in this case, the lesson was that I am a spiritual being inhabiting this, bodily mechanism for the time being, because I witnessed it all from there.
Well, and I think back then, if you had said eight track players, then I think we would really be dated. But if back then, when that first experience happened, there wasn't a whole lot of people that are talking about NDEs or out-of-body experiences as they are, like now. So when you've, received all this information, did you think, gosh, this is a little crazy? Did you have any doubts about what was happening?
Yes and no. I knew what I had experienced, but you're absolutely right in that there was really no community to speak of. There certainly were no superstars of near-death experience and anything like that. There was Dr. Moody and Dr. Kenneth Ring and PMH Atwater, I think, had done her first book. So it was known of, and people who had an interest in it could have found out. And I probably could have found out, but it was not the kind of thing that was really very well known at that point. And as a result, I didn't seek any kind of counseling or companionship with other people that had experienced it. And I thought, I better just keep this under my hat. If I talked about it to people, they just looked at me funny. And that's true. That is what happened to me in that case.
Well, and I've had out-of-body experiences, and I know when I've had them, they seem more real sometimes than this experience we're having here. So it's a little interesting, and I'm sure back in the day, coming back with all this information, it could have been a little bit of overwhelming. How did you cope and deal with it? You just stuffed it, or kind of journaled about it? What was your way of working through all that?
No, I stuffed it at the time, and I went back to work. I had a growing practice, professional practice, and was really busy, and just got re-involved with the material aspect of life, Mm-hmm. And although I've got to say, many people who have near-death experiences, their lives are transformed by them, and I think in a way that's because they're better known about now, that people are willing to kind of hold on or enter into the experience. Although I stuffed it, it did change me in some really important ways, I think, even if I wasn't allowing it to sort of rise to the level of my conscience so much. So it really wasn't until I had my second one, which was some years later. I'd left a marriage and moved to New York City, and I was living a kind of a riotous lifestyle. I was acting out. I'd been present for the death of my favorite aunt, who had been very important to me as a child. I was at her bedside, and I think that kind of launched me into a sort of an existential period of life, to put it mildly. Mm-hmm. And so I lived a kind of a nocturnal lifestyle in downtown Manhattan for years, and I ran with a very artistic group, you might euphemistically call it.
You're the artsy crowd, right?
Yeah, and I'm a creative artist by trade, so that's that it kind of was suitable. But of course, I could have done it in a much nicer way than I did, and the result was that I just I had kind of a toxic reaction. You could call it a drug overdose, or just the result of of all of this riotous living that caused me to basically fall out on the floor of my apartment one night and completely lose contact with my body again. I didn't have an out-of-body experience that time, but what happened is that the room filled in with a kind of a brilliant white cloud, and my girlfriend who was with me just vanished, and I was in this other place completely. I was not alone. I experienced the presence of somebody like behind, as I recall, behind my left shoulder, which is where they had been the first near-death experience too. And they told me to look into this certain direction, and a kind of screen opened up in the midst of this cloud and began to play scenes from my life, right? So this is the life review is another typical motif of near-death experiencers. And they weren't these golden moments or a highlight reel. They were these moments that had been really important that I may not have been as present for as I should have. Moments in my life when I could have learned something very important.
Wow.
If I had been paying closer attention. They made me realize, like the title of your show, that we live in this kind of eternal moment at all times. I don't feel that much differently now than I did when I was a kid in terms of my being in this present moment, and that it's within this present moment that I could have changed things or could have realized things, and that I still can, that I can kind of reach into the moment that I'm experiencing now and work within it, sort of form my life or manufacture my karma, so to speak.
I guess it says a lot about you as a soul to have these experiences, but also have these kind of awakenings through each NDE that you've had, because they're pretty profound. When you have the first one, especially back in the day, and Kenneth Ring and Moody, they're working on this stuff. But it was mostly, I think at that time they were drawing up a lot of their research on NDEs,
right,
to come to what they have established today. But to realize
a lot of testimonials and stuff.
Oh yeah, I know Kenneth Ring and just talk about amazing people, And so when you look at that, and then realizing that you as a soul are in this human body, and they're two separate things, and then having your second NDE and having another realization where they're showing you these you're based on perceptions, things could have been a little different, or you can look at things a little bit differently. It says a lot about you.
Well, it says that I take a beating and keep on ticking. Keep on ticking, right? But some people have much harder heads than others because that experience didn't really transform my life entirely too. I continued to live. I got to say, I lived in a more curiously detached way at that point in my life, and spent a number of years not involved in my career the same way that I had been, and sort of drifting in a way. Again, I didn't have any kind of support group, or I didn't know to really seek that out, because it still was not a big deal at that point. And it wasn't until the third near-death experience that I had, when I was assaulted by a gang of skinheads who knocked me unconscious and kicked and stomped me and stuff for quite a while. So that was my least favorite way to go. If you're,
I think they all are not really good ways to go.
No, I don't recommend any of this to anybody. That's why, read my book and you can avoid all of this, hopefully. But especially that last one, where I ended up having the kind of near-death experience that you might classify as being forced to return to this life.
Ooh.
I was in a place that was not nearly as heavenly, so to speak. It seemed a little more elemental, a little more terrestrial. And I was surrounded by individual spirits that I don't recollect, exactly who they were, kind of thing. But as in my former two experiences, I had this sense that we all come back with of absolute love, right? Of being joined into a loving consciousness without boundary, without limit, and being free from the kind of demanding serial thoughts that I had, or the sense of being trapped in a physical body at all. I just had an awareness of unity that was, something that you kind of, a genie you can't put back in a bottle, kind of, so to speak. Yeah. So when I was there with these individuals, I wanted to stay because I still kind of had a sense of this awful stuff that was going on to me physically, because it was hours that this gang was sort of working me over, kind of thing, while I was unconscious. But and so I wanted to stay there. I didn't want to go back, but they told me that I had things to do. So that's my recollection of it, is that I was instructed that I needed to go back because I hadn't completed certain things and I had gone about this part of it the wrong way, so to speak. And they pushed me through. I felt as though I was lifted and pushed through something. And when I kind of popped through, I opened my eyes and I was laying on the sidewalk, and there was an emergency medical technician who said, "He's back." And that was the third one. After which my life finally began to change. I mean, it had been changing, but then it really started to shift quite a bit,
Well, and what would you say is like the biggest thing that you learned with all these NDEs that you've had? Because I know there are lessons with each one, but coming back and when you had like, hey, my life is starting to change, I've had the third one, what really stuck with you?
Well, I think I think all three lessons stuck with me, and what happened to me was that I began to realize that I needed to die, and I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that I probably had experienced deaths in my life. My aunt dying. I had a couple of close friends die in my life. I had lost everything that I thought I was at different times. I'd passed through these kinds of dark souls of the night that I kind of see as a death experience, and come out the other side of it, reborn, so to speak, with this knowledge then that crystallized in me from the three experiences I'd had. That knowledge of being a spirit that occupies this body and having a kind of a mechanical role to play as a human being, only being subject to the kinds of feelings and experiences we have as human beings, and being able to see that struggle in other people too. So this kind of compassion that I got from being detached from the material aspect of life. And then in the second near-death experience, this sense that I was telling you about of this present moment, this eternal moment that everything is actually happening in, where I always have the opportunities to make of my life what I will, and where I always have had those opportunities and always will have them. And then in the third one, this sense of a purpose, that apparently all this is being kept track of. I know that sounds kind of scary sometimes, but this is all being kept track of in a loving way that informs who we are really meant to be and what we are meant to express, and some kind of purpose that we have in our life, whether it's just showing up for one another, or in my case, writing these books, or in your case, having your show, or, whatever it is that we're called on to do. There is some specific expression that we're here to channel consciousness through to achieve,
Oh, those are three very powerful messages for people to just live by and understand, and kind of take it as a mantra, because I think people really do get tied in too much that, about the physical body. And yes, it's our horsey that we're riding and we need to take care of it, but it's not who we are,
Yeah, and that's really what this book is kind of about, death in the sense of death not really existing, because clearly it did not exist for me. Now, you could say, okay, you didn't really die. Mm-hmm. But I did have this experience, an extra-dimensional experience on 3 different occasions that informed me that when that happens, we just step from one reality to another, that we're never detached from consciousness. Mm-hmm. So consciousness is this kind of field that we're always involved in, and in any life we live. I think these 3 lessons that I got from these near-death experiences still come to bear. They still play a part of, that we are spiritual beings, that we exist in the present moment, whatever life we're in, and that there is a purpose to our being here, and finding that purpose is part of our purpose,
Well, and so kind of to wrap back around too, so do you believe that as souls we need to go through an NDE or traumatic experience in order to evolve?
Well, yeah, because the fact that we don't actually die when we die mm-hmm. Indicates to me that the soul requires a death experience. I mean, if we're eternal beings who live forever, why don't we just live forever like this? Mm-hmm. It's because we have to pass through these different passages, apparently, and we have to experience what I consider this grounding humility that occurs to each of us. It's kind of a profound reboot, so to speak, We go back to this kind of default place where it doesn't matter who we are or who we think we are, and you could call it an ego death, right? Where you're reduced to just this sort of most authentic form of your spiritual self. And that's the point where you become teachable. Whether this death is the end of a long relationship, a marriage or something like that was defining you, or whether it's actually driving into a telephone pole and waking up on the other side, I think the same thing happens, that we are regrounded in this very elemental place. And so it's very, very important for us, I think, to maintain a sense of humility as much as we possibly can, so that we can be teachable and that we can grow spiritually from there. I've had out-of-body experiences, and they're not the same by any means. And when I have gone out-of-body, it does offer you a different viewpoint where you do have a greater sense of compassion, and kind of touching back on how you were talking about compassion through your NDEs, that you can really see the picture a little bit bigger. You understand that people are going through their own journey and their own challenges, and they have their own lessons that they're here to accomplish. In doing that, do you still carry that view with you wherever you go, or is it something that you have to step back in and look at? The tendency is just to default to your human state, mm-hmm. which
the
for me,
ego.
is oftentimes various stages of upset. Kind of, But then
I've had a few bad hair days, so I get it.
Everybody does. You can't. I'm a human being. I'm having a human experience, so I can't very well exist as an ethereal, lighter than air, effervescent, diaphanous spirit all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm in this ride for the long run right now, and so that's what I'm living. But I do have this stuff informing me all the time now. Mm-hmm. And if I sit in meditation, which is something that I strongly suggest that people do, because that's really the only way that I have experienced anything similar to the experiences that I had on the quote-unquote the other side, is to sit in meditation and have this same sense of kind of loving unity with all things, and a kind of a freedom from the sort of oppressive serial thinking, the demanding thoughts that we have all the time. So in a way, I'm obviously tethered to this life by this body and this experience, but I can also kind of release myself at times when I push that kind of reset, or I kind of reboot back to that level of humility as best as I possibly can, where I'm teachable again. And that's where spiritual evolution comes from, I think. This book, How to Survive Life and Death, is a lot about the death phenomenon and about ameliorating any kinds of worries that we have about it and stuff, and different aspects of it, and different ways that we might consider ourselves as dying. But I've got another book coming up that's called How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying, that'll be out early next year, that's a little bit more about living with these concepts a little bit more. So they both really are, because we're always alive. That's one of the main is that we're always alive.
Well, and then that's great. Then people can pick up How to Survive Life and Death, that talks about the NDEs without having to actually experience it.
After my third NDE, I went on trying to live kind of a normal life, and I did for about a year or a year and a half, and it wasn't working for me. I found a lot of my interests were changing dramatically, what I cared about, what I felt like I needed to be doing with my life, and I became very, very interested in texts, religious texts and spiritual books and stuff like that, and just found myself, unlike myself, studying up on all this stuff all the time, checking all kinds of books out from the library and running up my book purchasing bills and stuff,
Yeah.
And it just kind of organically led me to meditation. I also had an experience where I was kind of presented with an opportunity to buy a small house on the upper Delaware River, right on the river, which I was able to do. And there's a rock on the river that was calling out my name. and I just found myself synchronicitously being directed into this place in my life where these interests arose in me, and the call to search for them inwardly organically led me to a meditation practice that, I've made it a little bit more official by working with people and stuff, but it still really was just a personal discovery that I think it is for everybody, really. When you really discover what happens when you meditate, it's yours. It's your experience of life.
I know when I first started meditating, I was constantly sitting there going, am I meditating? And then you'd think about all these things that you'd have to do. Like I'd think about, oh gosh, I've got to walk the dog and I've got a list of stuff to do. And I'm like, oh shoot, quiet the mind, start back up.
What do you think about when you're not supposed to be thinking about anything?
Yeah, really.
and then you come to discover that there really is space between those thoughts. The thought requires consciousness, but consciousness does not require thought. I can sit there pretty much holding my breath, so to speak, in between two groups of thoughts and just find this moment of effervescent realization where I don't have to be anything but just alive and engaged in consciousness, in life,
That's a perfect place to be. Well, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Where can our listeners connect with you?
I have a blog that's at robert-kopecky.blogspot.com.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today, Robert.
Well, thanks, Marianne. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to be with us here today. It's been a pleasure, and I so appreciate all the letters I've been getting. If you'd like to reach out, suggest a show, or just get in contact with me, you can reach me at marianne@mariannepastana.com. So this is the end of our time together, and I'd like to thank all of you again, and remember, make every moment count. Join us next time for Moments with Marianne, when host Marianne Pestana brings another inspirational gifted leader to help us grow. Tune in every second Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Moments with Marianne, when the Dream Vision 7 radio network is at 1510 a.m. Boston. Or catch Moments with Marianne every Thursday and Friday at 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. Eastern Time by going to dreamvision7radio.com. To learn how Marianne started her business from the ground up, visit mariannepestana.com. Don't miss this, and remember, make every moment count.